I believe the biggest problem in the world is that people don't understand themselves enough. This show is designed to help you understand your INFJ personality, heal from your past, and create a life that you love. I'm Sarah Kuhn, and this is the Quiet Ones podcast. We got over 2 feet of snow in Boston this past weekend. I think some of the numbers were close to 30 inches. That's more snow than I've ever seen in my life in one place. So suffice it to say, I didn't spend a lot of time outside. Although we got most of the snow on between Friday night and Saturday. It was way too cold to go outside on Sunday. I tried. I dug my car about 3/4 of the way out, and then I gave up because I was just so cold. So instead of going outside and enjoying the weather, I went down a rabbit hole on a couple different documentaries that I love to watch. Both of them are on TLC. One of them is called Sister Wives, and another one is 90 Day Fiance. So I thought that today we would talk a little bit about the concept of acceptance. We talk about acceptance a lot nowadays in a lot of different ways, but most people who talk about acceptance a lot don't really understand what true acceptance is, and they certainly don't practice true acceptance. Most of us accept people that we find acceptable, right? We accept the people that we agree with. We accept the people that we like, the people that we get along with. But the people that we don't agree with, the ones we don't like, the ones that we would spend our lifetime fighting against, we don't offer those people the same type of acceptance. How often do you sit and listen to someone that you don't agree with? I bet it's not very often, especially if you're talking about something like politics or religion. And nowadays, politics kind of includes health-related issues too, right? When was the last time that you really even listened to someone that you didn't agree with, that you don't agree with? I bet it's not very often. I like to listen to podcasts, and it seems like most of the podcasts that I listen to, I don't 100% agree with every single thing that the people are saying. I agree with some of it, sometimes a lot of it, but not always all of it. But for me, that doesn't stop me from listening to the podcast. One of my favorite podcasters is Jewish, and there's nothing wrong with being Jewish. It's just that she talks about her religion a lot, and I'm not Jewish. So I don't necessarily relate to all of the religious things in her podcast. But I still feel like it's okay for me to listen to her show, and I can still learn from her experiences. Another one of the podcasts that I listen to, she doesn't believe in God, she believes in the universe. And even though I believe in God, I still listen to her show because I feel like she has a lot to offer. I like to watch, not only do I listen to podcasts, but I like to watch a lot of documentaries. As I started talking about, I like to watch Sister Wives, which is a show about polygamists. I'm not a polygamist. I don't have any intentions of being a polygamist, but I like to watch the show because it gives me, hopefully, if there's at least some measure of truth to the show, which I think that there is, I feel like it gives me a different perspective on life. It helps me understand how other people live their lives and how other people view the world. I feel like 90 Day Fiance does too, to a point. I know that a lot of 90 Day Fiance is not true. it's more exaggerated, more staged, more made up than what reality is. But I still feel like there's a lot to learn there. Plus, it's one of those train wrecks that like you want to look away, but for some reason you just can't. But there are other documentaries. I watched one on mountain climbers not too long ago. I love true crime, so I've watched probably hundreds of documentaries on serial killers and, you know, mass murderers, and even just people who have only murdered one person, like making a murder. Um, and there's a couple of other ones. The Staircase was really good on Netflix, I think. But I like seeing the world through other people's perspective, right? I like to learn from those types of people. Not necessarily that I want to learn from serial killers, maybe learn from their victims and how they got in that position in the first place. I just want to see their perspective. I want to learn about the world in a different way than the way that I've seen the world. I feel like to truly understand other people, you have to see the world from different perspectives. When I was younger, um, more than 10 years ago now, I went to England. I was volunteering for a nonprofit organization, and I was shocked and surprised, I guess, when I got there because they had such a different view of the world than I did. They had a different perspective on a lot of different things, not just the food that they ate and the way that they talked, but also their beliefs about life, the way that they went about their lives, the things that were important to them. They were different. They were a lot different than a lot of us are now in the United States. But I think that true acceptance comes with understanding. It comes with understanding other people and understanding their points of view. But I think the most important person that you have to understand is yourself. Most people don't understand themselves, not even on a minimum level. Most people never even think about diving into their own personality. In fact, a lot of people spend the majority of their lives running from themselves. And I have to say that I've spent quite a bit of my time doing that as well. It's very, very easy for me to focus on other people. It's easy for me to want to help other people and to see where they need help and to offer the appropriate type of help. But it's a lot harder for me to look at myself and see where I need help and then figure out how to get that help. A lot more difficult. When you decide that you want to understand, understanding it comes through questioning, investigating, digging, and just kind of like organizing your closet. You know, you have to take all the stuff out of your closet and you make this huge mess in order to sort through it and say, okay, this is what I need to get rid of, and this is how we're going to reorganize things. And sometimes it might even take you a while, because if you're anything like me, you dive into one of those projects and then you're like, oh wow, there's actually some containers that I need, so I need to go to Target and TJ Maxx, and it turns into be like a week-long project rather than just like a one-day project. I feel like digging into my personality has done the same thing. It almost feels like a life's work rather than just some simple thing to do. Once you start questioning, though, that's when you start really understanding things. One of the biggest questions that I've asked myself over and over again is, where do your beliefs come from? Where's your belief system? What are the core things that you believe about yourself, about life? Where do they come from? Why do you believe that? A lot of times our core beliefs come from our parents. We just adopt what our parents told us, what they believe, and we never questioned it. One of my favorite race car drivers has a podcast, and somebody asked him one time who he votes for, like in, presidential elections. And he said that he was a Republican. And they asked him why he's a Republican. And he was like, well, I don't know. My dad was a Republican. His dad was a Republican. So I guess I'm just a Republican. But it seemed like he had never even really thought about it. He was just like, well, you know, I love and respect my dad. And his dad had passed away at that point. So I feel like that made him even more solidified in his beliefs that he was going to be like his dad. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong to adopt the beliefs of your parents. It's probably both. It's probably a complicated combination of both. But it will tell you a lot about yourself, especially as INFJs. It's easy for us to, look at other people and figure out all of their problems, and it's a lot harder for us to look at ourselves, right? So if you feel like you've just adopted the beliefs of your parents, then you can look at your parents and say, okay, what are they doing that's right, and what are they doing that I don't necessarily agree with? Another place that a lot of our belief system comes from is religion. A lot of us, our views of the world are molded by what we believe. And that goes for whatever religion you believe in, right? If you come from a very conservative religion, then you're going to view the world through that lens. If you come from almost, like an agnostic or an atheist point of view, then you may feel like you are viewing the world devoid of religion. But a lot of times there are religious influences that you don't even see. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and they made the remark that most atheists don't necessarily believe in heaven, but they do believe in hell, which is interesting, right? Because hell is a concept that comes from the Bible. So, it comes from religion. So if you're atheist, then why would you believe in hell? But a lot of those types of questions are what comes up. And every time you come up with an answer, you kind of have to keep going, like, well, why do I believe that? Well, why is that true? Well, what's the reason behind that? It's interesting. It's interesting what you come up with. Especially if you come from a religion where you don't really know what you believe. And again, there's nothing, that's wrong with that. A lot of people are in that place. When I was in North Carolina, I had a friend there, and I was complaining about not having a lot of friends. And she said, well, you should come to my church because there's a lot of nice people at my church, and I've met a lot of my friends there. And I'm like, well, what church do you go to? And she goes, I think it's a Methodist church. And I'm like, are you Methodist? And she goes, well, I'm Baptist, but I go to a Methodist church. And I'm like, okay, like, why would you go to a church that isn't your denomination? And she's like, well, it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, okay. So I agreed to go with her to church. And she explained to me where the church was. It was like in downtown Charlotte. And she's like, it's on the corner of this street and this street. And it's this really big old church, and you won't miss it, I promise. And so I drive down there, and I'm like, I had to call her. And I'm like, there isn't a Methodist church here. There's a Baptist church here. Is that this church? And she's like, oh yeah, it is. I guess it is a Baptist church. And I'm like, okay. So I guess that would make sense if you're Baptist and you go to a Baptist church. But she's like, I don't know. I never really pay attention. I just like the people here. And I'm like, how do you not pay attention? Like, you don't hold the same beliefs that they hold? Do you even know what they teach? And she's like, I don't know. I like the people. So we went in, and I sat through the sermon, I guess you would call it. And this would have been prior to 2017, probably 2016. And this sermon was about politics. I don't even remember what it was about, but I remember that it was about politics. And I remember we went out to lunch afterwards, and I was like, do they always preach about politics? Is it weird that they're preaching about politics? And she's like, I don't know. I don't really pay attention. I'm like, she goes, why do they not preach about politics at your church? And I'm like, no, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon about politics. So it was funny to me, and I guess kind of eye-opening, that she didn't know anything about what her church believed. I started asking her some simple things about, like, what do you believe about when people die? What do you believe about the end of time? What do you believe is right and wrong? You know, do you believe in the 10 Commandments? Do you believe in the New Testament, or do you just go by the Old Testament and the Bible? And she couldn't answer any of the things. She was like, I don't know. I guess I really just go to church for the people. I'm like, okay. I guess that tells you a lot about people, is why they go to church, why they pick the church that they go to. And that could tell you a lot about yourself too. For me, I mean, I guess this is true in every aspect of my life, from work to church to school. I never went to those places because of the people. I never went to school to make friends. I never went to church to make friends. I don't go to work to make friends either. I go there for the reason that I'm going there, right? I go to church to learn about God. I go to work to get paid, basically. And I went to school to learn. It was never my choices were never influenced by the people that were there. So when you dive into thinking about yourself, not just your personality, but to understanding yourself on a deeper level, why you are the way that you are, right? So you have to question yourself. Think about how you have been in the past. Think about your habits, why you made the choices that you made, and what you can learn from all of those things. When you look back at yourself, do you look back to learn, or do you look back to criticize? I'm really good at criticizing myself. I'll just be honest. I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm just saying that that is the thing that comes most naturally to me, is criticizing. I can look back at some of the things that I've done in the past and say, why did I do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense that I made that decision. Just recently, I've been making some changes to the website that my blog is on. And I basically have two different websites. If you've been to my website, the main website that's called INFJ Woman is hosted on one platform, and then the blog part of it has a subdomain, so it's blog.infjwoman. It's hosted on a completely different website. And I've questioned myself as to why I started that in the first place. And there is a good reason. The main website, I wanted it to load quickly, and it does. But that platform doesn't have a blog with it. So in order to have a blog, you have to either go through this very tedious process of making each one of the pages by itself, which I didn't want to do, or you have to host it on a website that is set up for a blog, like WordPress. So it's been hosted by WordPress for a couple of years, and well, for 3 years now. And so the hosting came up for renewal, and I was questioning whether or not I wanted to pay for it, because it's way more expensive than what I wanted to pay. And I was like, it doesn't do what I want it to do. But then the other part of me is like, oh, it'd be so much work to change it. But then I just started thinking about, well, what would happen if I did change it? And so I started doing some research into what other platforms could do, like what their capabilities were. One of the big things that I've wanted for 3 years now is a community. We talk about having a community for just people who are INFJs. And so I found a a website hosting platform that has a community built in that's basically free. And I was like, wow, that would be really cool. And it's cheaper than the other one and it loads just as fast. So now I have to transfer everything. And I know that there are 122 blog posts because I've been through half of them and trying to clean them up. So hopefully soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, that new back end site, I guess, to my website will launch. And there's going to be a community that's attached to it that I'm really excited about. But that whole process, especially the process of going through each one of the blog posts, and when they were imported, it messed up all of the spacing and a lot of other things. There's some coding that has to be changed. So I have to go through each one of them individually. And like I said, there are 122 of them. I know that because every time I finish one, I mark it off and I'm like, oh, there's still 97 left. Oh, there's still 75 of them left to do. And even though it only takes a couple of minutes, it's a couple of minutes, times 122. So going through that process, it's easy for me to start criticizing myself and say, why did I just make this decision, first of all? Why did I make the decision in the past to go to that one hosting platform? Couldn't I have done something better in the past so that I wouldn't be here right now? But I typically say that every time I rebuild my website. And if you know me, I've done that multiple times. I actually enjoy building websites, as tedious as it can be and time consuming and frustrating at times. Um, it's a good time to reflect and say, okay, I'm not going to criticize myself. I'm just going to learn and make better decisions in the future. I try really hard now when I look back at the past and I think about some of the decisions that I made. I try to look at my younger self with a lot more compassion. I know that I did the best job that I could have with what I knew at that point. It's easy now to say, well, I could have done better, but you know more now than what you knew back then, right? So the best thing that you can do is have compassion and sympathy for that person and to know that you did the best that you could. Most of us try to hide from our past. I try to push a lot of it down because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to remember it. Because a lot of remembering it too comes with regret, especially of like, man, I'm 36 years old. Like, shouldn't I have done more at this point? Shouldn't I be in a different place? Shouldn't I have my own house rather than live in an apartment? I mean, there's a lot of roads not taken. But at the same time, if you wouldn't have experienced the things that you did, then you wouldn't be the person that you are today, right? So this is the best way that we can understand ourselves, to really ask yourself questions, a lot of questions that you've been hiding from. Things like, are you honest? I I asked myself that question not too long ago when I thought, yeah, I'm honest. I'm pretty honest with other people. I don't like to lie to people. But then the question came up, but are you really honest with yourself? Is there anything that you're lying to yourself about? And I thought, oh, yeah, there's some other things that I'm lying to myself about. Some things that I don't want to talk about or don't want to admit. One of my friends and I both were talking about how we don't like to look in the mirror. We don't like to look in the mirror because we don't like what we see and we don't want to admit that it's that bad. We don't want to admit that we've gained as much weight as we know that we have. And when you think about it, that is a form of lying, right? Even if you're just lying to yourself, it's not being fully truthful. I was reading a book too recently. I think I've mentioned this in the last few podcasts, probably. There's a chapter in the book called Don't Lie. No, it's called Tell the Truth, or at least Don't Lie. And the author brings up the concept that when you are somebody who likes to please other people, you end up lying a lot. Because if you are telling a lie to keep the peace, or if you are hiding how you truly feel simply to keep the peace, or if you're doing things to make other people comfortable that make you uncomfortable, then in essence, you're lying, right? When I looked at it from that perspective, I was like, ooh, I do that a lot. There's so many things that I do that are just to keep the peace or not to rock the boat. That was like a core belief in my family. Like, if somebody's mad at you, it's your problem. If you're mad at somebody else, it's still your problem. And don't make a scene, don't make a big deal. Just keep it to yourself. Just be quiet. Don't throw a huge fit. And it doesn't matter if you were the person who was wronged. It doesn't matter what happened. Just keep the peace at all costs. So when I look at that, I think about all of the ways that I learned that lying was better than telling the truth. And that's made me rethink a lot of things and made me really rethink my whole perspective on life. Is it really better to keep the peace than to tell the truth? Is there some sort of compromise in between where you're still telling the truth, but you're not creating a scene? It's made me think about a lot of things differently. So then I went back and I thought about the morals and ideals and beliefs that I hold in my life. And I had to compare them to this concept of lying. And I think, okay, are all of them shaped around this idea that keeping the peace is better than telling the truth? And how does that influence whether or not I find myself acceptable? How does that influence the thoughts that I think and the ideas that I have? How does that affect whether or not I actually want to look in the mirror? Like I said, it can be a really messy process. You might stumble upon some things that maybe you don't really want to know about yourself. But I go back to, you can't understand other people until you can really understand yourself, right? It's so easy to look at other people and say, I can't believe they make the choices that they do. I can't believe I have two friends who are married and they are incredibly unhappy in their marriages, but they don't get divorced. And it's easy for me on the outside to judge them and say, why would you want to spend your whole life being unhappy? Right? But I don't know the family that they grew up in. I don't know the things that they were taught as they grew up. I don't know the life that they've had. I don't know why they have those beliefs. I just know that I don't want to end up in that spot. So the best thing that I can do is look at myself and find some understanding there. Is there any way that I can understand that? Is there any way that I can learn from that? I put together a free guide with some questions that will help you start diving into your beliefs and your values. It talks about, it's basically questions that help you dive into, why do I have the beliefs that I have? What are my beliefs? So that a lot of people don't ever write their beliefs down. They just think that they know. and then something comes up, sometimes, big things, pop culture things, sometimes political things. And then you start to question, like, why do I believe this? And maybe you end up believing contradictory things. So it's nice to have them written down. I think that we as INFJs too, it's easy for us to think about things, but to finish the thought and to really flesh it out, we need to talk about it or to write it down so that it makes more sense to us. So I think writing these things down will help you a lot, and it'll help you think in a certain direction, so that you're focused on what your beliefs are and what you're willing to compromise, what you're willing to let go, and what you need to work on too. So you can find the link for the free guide in the show notes. And I really hope that that will help you think more about what is acceptable in your life. What is acceptable with your friends? What's acceptable with your significant other? What's acceptable in your job and in the people that you listen to as well, because those people influence a large part of your life. You can pick up a lot of things from people and not really understand how much they influence you until you really sit down and start to think about it. And nowadays, it's easy to get caught up in things like cancel culture, right? And you start almost censoring yourself, censoring your thoughts and your opinions and your beliefs so that you're not quote unquote unacceptable to other people. But I really want to encourage you not to worry about those types of things and to almost fight against them, right? Because I believe that everybody is acceptable. You get to choose what you believe is acceptable, but it starts with you. Your understanding of the whole world starts with you. And if you're not acceptable to yourself, how can you accept anybody else? How can you be acceptable to other people? And how can you decide what is acceptable to you? Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate every single one of you. Please make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast. It helps other people to be able to find us. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you again next week. Hi there. I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm working very hard to produce content that will help you, and I really, really appreciate your support. Also, if you want some more inspiration, check out this video right here.